As President Donald Trump prepares to celebrate his first 100 days in office, his popular support has sunk to another all-time low. We'll be evaluating his first 3 months as the leader of the most powerful nation on earth. And with reports that the meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe did not go well, we'll be asking what got in the way of the two sides making headway in bilateral ties. Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Xin. U.S. President Donald Trump has reached the lowest approval rating of any newly elected president at this stage since World War II. That's the finding of several U.S. polls just days ahead of the 100-day mark of his presidency. A Gallup poll shows only 41% of Americans approve of his performance now, compared with 65% for Obama when he came into office. This number is not only lower than any other newly elected presidents, but is also lower than when he first came into office, which was at an already historic low. However, Obama had fallen 2 points by this time in his presidency, while Trump has fallen by 4 points. Let's look further, though, into these numbers, as there are mixed messages concerning different aspects of his work. How can we evaluate Donald Trump's first 3 months in office? Joining me today are Zhao Hai, research fellow from Tsinghua University in Beijing, and Douglas Smith, former assistant secretary at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security in Washington, D.C. Now, before we go into the discussion, I would like to read out a statement posted by the White House on the internet regarding President Trump's first 100 days. And this is what it says. It claimed that Donald Trump had taken bold action to restore prosperity, keep Americans safe and secure, and hold government accountable. It went on to say, at an historic pace, this president has enacted more legislation and signed more executive orders than any other president in over half a century. With a focus on rebuilding the military, ending illegal immigration, and restoring confidence in our economy, the president is keeping his promises to the American people. So, Mr. Zhao, let me come to you first. Having seen the poll numbers and having seen what the White House says about Donald Trump's performance, what is your evaluation of his performance after 100 days?
I think, first of all, President Trump came into office with 3 million votes less than Hillary Clinton. So, in that point, he is a minority president. So right now I call him a minority. He has a minority mandate in that respect. So far, his performance, even though in terms of general polls, is not going very well. But recently, University of Virginia came out with a new poll asking the people who voted for him during the election, general election, whether or not they will support him until this day. 93% of the people still say they approve of President's performance so far. So I think even though President Trump has a majority problem, but in terms of his base, he still has a very solid base, a very solid group of people supporting his policies, and still willing to wait for his further performance down the road.
Mr. Smith, what is your assessment of Donald Trump's first 100 days in office? Do you think he has done a good job, or do you think the polls have shown the reality so far?
I think the polls are absolutely showing the reality. There was a really interesting quote from the president last night on an interview that he did, where he said that he didn't expect the job to be as tough as it is. And I think that alone speaks to what's going on. You know, I do think your other guest makes a great point on the fact that he did get 3 million less votes than Hillary Clinton. Where I think his real challenge is going to be is that one of the challenges that Hillary Clinton had during the election was she couldn't get people excited. And as a result, 5 million fewer people came out in this presidential than in the last presidential. The challenge that this president is now seeing is that he can't run this as a CEO of a company. He just can't mandate and dictate actions. He had a horrible defeat, not once, not twice, but 3 times on his proposal to ban his travel ban. He's had a horrible defeat on health care. And he's realizing that the vast majority of the country is now, unfortunately, what we say in America, a day late and a dollar short, but paying attention to what is going on. You know, in fairness to him, the one thing I would say that is kind of intriguing in what he's doing is his new approach to China. He spent 9 months on the campaign trail completely talking in ignorance on the global stage and the challenges and the complexities of what's going on. I think his meeting with the Chinese president opened his eyes to a degree, and I think some of the news we're seeing about North Korea is somewhat encouraging. The fact that he's backed off a little bit on his claiming to go to war against North Korea and having the UN Security Council take some steps towards that. But all this being said, I think they can say all they want. The first 100 days has been an unmitigated disaster for him.
Yeah, Mr. Zhao, what is your reaction to what President Trump said about he didn't expect this job to be tough? I mean, maybe it is also understandable. You know, he has never been the president before, so he has a lot of things to learn. What do you think of this thing he said?
Yes, he was never elected to public office. He has no public experience in terms of administration. However, he was not expected to be elected as president, and he has not prepared a team to govern. So in that respect, we can expect him making a lot of mistakes and not understanding the full spectrum of what the presidency entails. However, on the other hand, he has done something that pleased his base. For example, he has pushed through his nominee for the Supreme Court and put him on the bench. So I think that single achievement could give him a lot of credit in the base of his on the right. On the other hand, he also adopted executive orders such as resuming the construction of or approving the construction of Keystone XL pipeline, which is also sort of realizing one of his major campaign promises. Even though he failed on healthcare, tax reform, he's not been able to push through a lot of bills through the Congress. However, I think people are willing, as I said before, the conservative base are willing to give him more time and more credit. And at the same time, because the mainstream media is so attacking him from all the possible aspects, people on the right are having some sympathy to him and also sort of believe that the media, a very high percentage of people believe that the mainstream media is against President Trump.
Mr. Smith, do you have any reaction to what Mr. Zhao just said here? I mean, for instance, people are talking about he doesn't have a team, so that he can't formulate his policies. And part of the reason, if it is not his intentional strategy, part of the reason is that many of his nominations have had a lot of difficulties to be approved. What is your reaction on that?
No, absolutely. I would say two things. You know, in the U.S. systems, there are about 550 roughly appointments. You know, the president makes around 3,000, but there are about 550 that are absolutely critical for the running of the government. You know, the highest leadership within the various agencies. Of that 550, he's only filled approximately 30 of them. So that gives you an idea of just the massive talent gap that he's dealing with. The second thing I would say
what are the reasons,
about the
though? I was going to ask you, what are the reasons of this blockade, of this, you know, a huge lack of personnel?
Right. It's actually not a blockade. It's lack of progress on their part. You know, they can blame the Democrats all they want, but they've not put any names forward. You know, in order for a name to get approved, you actually have to provide one. You can't put someone in a job if you don't actually suggest the name for it. So your other guest makes a great point. He never thought he was going to win. They did no planning whatsoever and had no understanding on the complexities of what it takes to run the U.S. government. So now they find themselves in a spot of having to fill all of these positions, and one, they don't have a list of people to do it, and two, most people like me that come in and out of government, we work in the private sector, we come in, we serve our president. Many of my peers on the Republican side have no interest in working for this president, and I think that's a major issue that he's coming up against. It's the Republican Congress that are stopping so much of what he's trying to do. He can blame the Democrats, but in our system, majority rules, and in our Congress, the Republicans control the Senate, they control the House of Representatives, and with that, if he had had a proper plan, you would think he would get things through. But I think that is really the sort of the number one failing that he's realized, that is he just can't boss Congress along. He has to bring to them appropriate suggestions for legislation, but it is the Congress that legislates, not the White House. And this notion that they can go out there and say all they want, they've had the most successful 100 days in legislation, it's just absolutely false. They've had no victories in legislation. They've put nothing through. When executive orders are a very different thing, and while he's had many of them out there, that is not the same as legislative achievement.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the geopolitical hotspots that we have been paying a lot of attention to. For instance, Trump decided to drop 59 Scud missiles on Syria, and he dropped the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, and we're still seeing heightened tensions with the DPRK. How do you look at his handling of these issues in his 100 days in office? Mr. Zhao?
I think if you look at the Trump administration right now, it's like a two-tier government. On the upper tier, you have President Trump, his family, his advisors in the White House. But on the other hand, you have professionals like General Mattis and also Tillerson, very strong willful people that are installed in the secretary's position. So I think in terms of grand strategy, the White House itself is lacking of any grand strategies. They're not prepared, and they came into the office with certain ideas, but it's not practical. But on the other hand, in dealing with individual crises that is happening in Syria, also in Afghanistan, later on in North Korea, I think the professionals are steering the wheel and taking this very professionally. That's why I think in terms of approval rating, looking domestic agenda, it's a total failure. But if you look at the international handling, in certain respects, for example, Syria, the bombing of Syria actually got bipartisan support. So I think that's an area that Trump may claim victory.
Mr. Smith, do you share Mr. Zhao's viewpoint here?
Actually, I don't. I think 59 missiles at a runway in Syria, a policy doesn't make. I mean, we saw it as recently as this week. His daughter was in Germany, and his daughter is calling for more Syrian refugees to come into the United States, where at the same time the White House is saying absolutely not. I mean, I think the messages he is sending on the foreign stage are disturbing at best and a little bit fearful at worst. Yesterday in the United States there was very big news. He spent the entire campaign talking about ripping up what we call the North American Free Trade Agreement. Yesterday he pulled that back and said, well, actually, no, we're going to go back and we're going to renegotiate it. We're seeing constant back and forth. We saw this around his claims on the Chinese government and currency manipulation. He now changed on that. He's not telegraphing to his peers in the international community kind of a consistent approach. While I do agree that some of the people he's put in place, Secretary Kelly, my old Department of Homeland Security, General Mattis over at the Pentagon, Secretary Tillerson, they're highly competent, quality people, but they're not being given the chance to actually formulate a long-term and sustainable policy, and that's going to be the real challenge. We saw that as recently as yesterday in the rolling out of his proposed tax plan. It was a very big, broad plan with almost no details. And so almost immediately they were stepping on their message, trying to defend it, because their press secretary was out there answering questions in the wrong way because they hadn't provided him any details as to what this plan actually looks like. So I think that causes tremendous confusion.
I'm afraid this kind of confusion might continue in the days, months, maybe, hopefully not years ahead. Many thanks to our two guests, Zhao Hai, Research Fellow from Tsinghua University in Beijing, and Douglas Smith, a former Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security in Washington, D.C. And here is my take of this story. Now, by coincidence, our show was born shortly before President Trump came into office. Slowly, we are seeing, however, a kind of consistency, in my eyes, in his style. For instance, he wants America's allies to pay for the security it provides, which is why he has just asked the Republic of Korea or South Korea to pay for the THAAD missile defense system. He has said he will abide by the One China policy after some, going back and forth there. But after he said he's going to follow through on the One China policy, he has said most recently he will not take another phone call from Taiwan's leader Tsai Ing-wen, both of which China welcomes. Now, it's too early to conclude that during his presidency we're going to see a good relationship developing between China and the United States, but there are some promising signs. However, we have also seen, as we have discussed, the use of missiles in Syria and the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, not to mention the fast escalation of tensions on the Korean Peninsula since he came into office. The latest announcement from his administration shows he is returning or thinking of returning to diplomatic means on the DPRK instead of threatening military strikes. Now, that's okay if he was really learning, but if he did it intentionally in the same way he's set to conduct his business negotiations, then that tactic is surely a dangerous game to play. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on Thursday discussed joint economic projects on a group of disputed islands. Now, some had predicted that this way for the countries finally to sign a peace treaty ending Second World War. Now, Japan and Russia both claim 4 islands north of Japan's island of Hokkaido that came under Russian control in the summer of 1945. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was hoping to use economic cooperation and personal diplomacy to forge a relationship with Vladimir Putin in order to settle the territorial dispute and forge a closer strategic partnership. But by all accounts, the meeting ended badly. In part, this is a result of tensions on the Korean Peninsula, where Japanese-Russian coordination could be stymied by Japan's self-defense forces' participation in U.S. naval exercises and Russia's economic ties with the DPRK. Now, Putin and Abe say they agree that the situation has unfortunately got a lot worse and they will cooperate closely. So what does this all mean? With me in Beijing is Yoichi Shimatsu, former editor with the Japan Times Group, and in London, Anna Matueva, visiting senior research fellow at King's College. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us. First of all, let's take a quick look at this report from Moscow.
The leaders of Russia and Japan say the situation on the Korean Peninsula has seriously deteriorated, calling on all sides for restraint. Vladimir Putin hosted Japan's Shinzo Abe at the Kremlin, and the two leaders agreed to cooperate to help diffuse tensions in the region. The two sides said they discussed joint economic projects on the disputed Kuril Islands, which could pave the way for the two nations to finally sign a peace treaty, formally ending World War II. Putin and Abe agreed that an official Japanese delegation will visit the disputed islands this summer to see the progress of joint activities. The islands were seized by Soviet Union forces at the end of World War II, and 17,000 Japanese residents were forced to flee. Progress has been slow in solving this issue, despite this being the 17th meeting between Putin and Abe since 2012. While thorny issues remain in Russian-Japanese relations, their recent meetings are seen as a sign that both Moscow and Tokyo are eager to settle the dispute and sign the treaty that the former Soviet Union and Japan never managed to negotiate.
Mr. Shimatsu, let me come to you first. Now, Putin and Abe said they both wanted to see, among other things, a resumption of the six-party talks to resolve the DPRK issue. Do you think this would really happen?
Well, that was, I think, a nicety, but I think the real situation was pointed out on the morning after, which was one of the strangest days in Japanese press history, as all the major dailies pulled their front-page stories or cut them radically. And this reflected a division, a split between the foreign ministry on one hand and the prime minister's office on the importance of this statement of moving closer to a settlement of the islands issue, which means toward a peace treaty. And at this time, that's especially important because of the naval buildup against the DPRK that Japan is participating in. So I think this indicates that Russia and Japan do not see eye to eye. Maybe Russia has some its own national security interests in mind, and Japan, unfortunately, is straddled with Shinzo Abe's legislation, law for a collective security law in which if allies, meaning American troops, are fired upon in any way, Japanese soldiers are obligated to come to their aid with weapons and join that battle. So it means that if there is any firing in the DPRK, Japan will be a full partner in that war, and that really opens up not peace, but the possibility, if Russia feels threatened, of a full-on engagement. And we know what that leads to. If Russia has to take down the United States and Japan, we're talking about something like a world war.
Now, Anna, Russia opposes U.S. military deployments in Northeast Asia while Japan supports them, and Japan is worried that Moscow may be reluctant to pressure Pyongyang owing to their economic ties. Do you think the Putin-Abe summit has addressed and, to some extent, solved these differences?
Well, I think the visit was not such a disaster as has been talked about. I think it's quite symptomatic that Abe actually went to Moscow. and that they meet so regularly, because remember, Russia is quite isolated by Western leaders. So most people do not go to Moscow to talk to Putin. So that's one thing. The other thing is that Russia opposes US military deployment and built up anywhere, full stop. So it's not unusual that it opposes it in this particular case of North Korea. But if there will be some kind of military action by design or by default, which is also possible, given President Trump's temperament, we also understand it can be something happening which is not being planned, that threatens Russian territory directly. So that's why Putin is very keen to try to avoid that kind of scenario. So yes, diplomacy, economic instruments, some kind of political pressure, bilaterally and multilaterally are the preferred interests at the moment.
Mr. Shimatsu, the most immediate threats, most immediate results rather from the summit is 100 Japanese investment or joint development projects in the islands. Now, have these economic deals helped in solving or helped in paving the way to the future solving of these territorial disputes, do you think?
We have to look at these economic plans in their context. Back in December, after Donald Trump had won the elections and looked like he had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin, Shinzo Abe tried to get the lead there. He wanted to compete with the U.S. to get sort of the benefits of that. And that involved getting energy deals from Sakhalin, north of Japan, a bridge, a pipeline with a bridge into Japan, but at the risk here of breaking the sanctions that are imposed against Russia for the Crimea and the Ukraine events. So Abe was willing to ditch Ukraine, although Japan is very close, has an intelligence and defense treaty with Ukraine, was ready to sacrifice that to move ahead of Trump. Now suddenly it vanished like a mirage after Trump got in his huge quagmire in Washington over accusations of being too close to Putin. So basically, a lot of those economic deals, we know the ones in southern Russia, near Sochi, well, those are going to go through, but one of them's a casino. On the islands themselves, there will be a special team that goes in, but right now the only advance is that some of the people who used to be residents that are Japanese, 80 years old, will go see the graves on one-day visits. That's not a lot of, it's a good thing to do. It's very humanitarian, you know, of Putin, but I wouldn't call that a major economic
Anna, what do you look at this how do you look at this aspect? Do you think that Abe's economic plans could advance Japan's case over the islands?
Firstly, expectation that there will be a breakthrough based on Russia handing over 4 islands to Japan is completely unrealistic. Yes, President Putin solved his territorial problem in 2014 in Crimea, but it doesn't mean that Prime Minister Abe can solve his territorial problem in the same way with Russia regarding the islands. The Russian position hasn't changed since the Soviet days. They are prepared to hand over 2 islands and keep the 2 larger ones as kind of the price for signing the peace treaty. So that has not altered. But giving up territory also entails that kind of risk that Tokyo would then lay claims to Sakhalin. Whether it's realistic or not, I don't know, but that's something which cannot be discounted in Russian political thought. So the current strategy is try to make the issue of sovereignty kind of wither away. That means returning residents if they want to come and visit, or even some of them will maybe want to come and live there. Opening economic opportunities, social opportunities, so that when there will be more kind of exchanges, when it will be quite easy to travel, and if you wish even to settle there, then the expectation is that the actual sovereignty would not be such a poisoned cake as it is now, with development of all sorts of contacts. That's something which has been happening, say, in Europe. If we look at the issue of South Tyrol, yes, it remained in Italian jurisdiction, but Austrians have lots of rights, and it does not seem to be an issue as it used to be like 30 years ago.
Yeah, well, last question, Mr. Shimatsu. I'm afraid we only have about 40 seconds. Why do you think Shinzo Abe chose to go to Russia this time anyway, despite the wrong kind of atmosphere?
Well, there's geostrategic regions. You know, this flotilla that Donald Trump is trying to send into the Sea of Japan, or EC as the Koreans call it, the two major military powers there are in Vladivostok, that's Russia's Pacific Command Center, the Pacific Fleet, and Maizuru, that's a major Japanese base. So if things go crazy there, we're going to see Japan and Russia go at it. So there has to be some ground rules laid down. I think that's why he went.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Shimatsu, former editor with the Japan Times Group, and Anna Matoeva, visiting senior research fellow with the King's College London. Now here is my last point. While the U.S. administration is coming around to a political solution on the DPRK, Japan, which had been closely following the U.S. baton, might now be realizing that they had been jumping a bit too fast and too high. Now it's not only time for Abe to calm down on the DPRK issue, but also to dampen his expectations of President Donald Trump to help him stay in power while turning Japan into the de facto leader of Asia. The embarrassment following Abe's meeting in Moscow is just one sign of how unwise he was in his calculations of using a regional crisis to maximize his interests. And that's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the CGTN Live application to watch our show on your mobile devices. For previous shows, go to the CGTN channel of YouTube. Click on the playlist and look for The Point with Liu Xin. Thank you very much and have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday at the same time.